Valentine's Eve had always been a bitter reminder of my solitude, but that year it carried an unusual weight. The night was cloaked in an oppressive silence, the kind that muffled even the wind. I sat alone in my small, dimly lit apartment, the air heavy with the scent of old coffee and unopened mail. Outside, a pale moon hung low in the sky, its light barely piercing through the thick clouds. I was half lost in a book I wasn't truly reading when the knock came. A soft, deliberate tap that sent a shiver down my spine. I frowned. No one ever visited me, especially not at this hour. Setting the book aside, I hesitated, the unease prickling at the back of my neck urging me to ignore it. But curiosity, like a thread pulled too tight, compelled me toward the door. When I opened it, there was no one there. Only the faint crunch of gravel fading into the distance suggested someone had been. At my feet lay a crimson envelope, its color unnaturally vibrant against the worn mat. My breath caught as I picked it up. The envelope was cool to the touch, its wax seal embossed with a symbol I didn't recognize, a coiling shape that seemed to shift subtly under the light. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded with meticulous care. You are cordially invited to meet me under the silver birch at midnight. I offer you my love, eternal and undying. The words were written in an elegant script that seemed too perfect, as though etched rather than penned. My chest tightened. I should have thrown it away, dismissed it as some prank or mistake. But something about the invitation drew me in, a magnetic pull that gnawed at the edges of reason. I couldn't shake the image of that crimson seal, the strange shifting emblem, the silver birch. I knew the place, an old tree on the edge of the forest that bordered the town. A peculiar spot, whispered about in vague folklore, but never taken seriously. They said the tree marked a crossing, though no one could explain what that meant. I told myself it was ridiculous, that there was no reason to go. Yet as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I found myself stepping out into the chill of the night, the crimson invitation clutched tightly in my hand. The air outside was unnaturally still, and the moon's light painted the world in an eerie, colorless glow. The path to the forest was familiar, but felt alien under the moonlight. Shadows clung to the edges of my vision, and every sound, the crunch of gravel, the rustle of leaves, seemed amplified, unnatural. My heart pounded as I approached the silver birch, its pale trunk gleaming like bone against the dark backdrop of the trees. Beneath the tree stood a figure, cloaked in shadow. They didn't move, didn't speak, yet their presence pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. The invitation fell from my trembling hand as their voice drifted toward me, soft and velvety, like smoke curling in the air. You came. I got your invitation, I stammered, my voice barely audible against the oppressive silence. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, they stepped closer, their movements fluid, almost otherworldly. The shadows clinging to them seemed alive, swirling faintly, as if reluctant to let go. As they emerged into the moonlight, I saw that they weren't entirely solid. Their form wavered at the edges, their features indistinct. The only detail I could discern was their eyes, two pinpoints of silvery light that seemed to see straight through me. "Do you fear me?" they asked, their voice carrying an unsettling calm. It wasn't a question, it was a statement dressed as one. I couldn't bring myself to answer. They gestured toward the ground beside the tree, where a patch of grass lay unusually smooth and undisturbed, as though waiting. I hesitated, but the pull I felt earlier grew stronger, guiding me forward despite the dread churning in my gut. I sat stiffly, my back against the cold bark of the birch. "Why did you invite me?" I finally managed to ask. They tilted their head, the motion both human and entirely wrong. "Because I have seen your shadow, and it is like mine." The words struck something deep within me. My shadow. I glanced down at the ground, but the moonlight betrayed nothing unusual, just the vague silhouette of my body stretching behind me. The figure extended a hand, their fingers long and faintly translucent, like smoke shaped into form. "Dance with me," they said, a soft command. The weight of their words made refusal impossible. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I took their hand. The moment our fingers met, the world seemed to shift. The forest melted into a swirling void, where the only constant was the tree and the figure before me. Shadows stretched and coiled around us, forming strange, hypnotic patterns that seemed to dance to a rhythm I couldn't hear. The figure moved with grace, their steps light and purposeful. I followed, clumsy and disoriented, yet unable to pull away. The shadows wrapped around us, whispering secrets I couldn't understand, filling the space with a quiet hum that vibrated in my bones. As the dance continued, I realized something horrifying. My shadow no longer followed me. It had detached, swirling freely in the void, mimicking the movements of the figure. And as it danced, it grew darker, more distinct, taking on a shape that was almost familiar. I tried to stop, to pull away, but the figure tightened their grip. "You're beautiful like this," they murmured, their silvery eyes fixed on mine. "Stay with me, and you'll never have to be alone again." The swirling shadows around me thickened, their whispers growing louder. For the first time, I realized that the dance was not just a ritual, it was a binding, and I was at its center. I woke to find myself lying on my living room couch, the faint light of dawn spilling through the blinds. My body felt heavy, as if I had been carrying something far beyond my strength. The night's events were a blur, slipping through my mind like fragments of a half-remembered dream. The shadows, the figure, the dance, it all felt unreal, yet the chill lingering in my bones told me otherwise. The crimson envelope lay on the coffee table, untouched yet radiating a peculiar presence. I stared at it, half expecting the paper to shift or the seal to dissolve into shadowy tendrils. But it remained still, ordinary in its silence. And yet, as the day wore on, I began to notice things that weren't quite right. It started with my shadow. At first, I thought it was fatigue playing tricks on me. The way it moved didn't seem unusual until I noticed the delay, how it lagged, just a fraction of a second, behind my own movements. It felt wrong, as though it wasn't tethered to me anymore, but followed out of obligation. When I raised my hand, the shadow hesitated, as if reluctant, before finally mirroring the gesture. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was my mind processing the strange events of the night before. I busied myself with mundane tasks, making coffee, tidying up, answering emails. But no matter how much I distracted myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. By afternoon, the unease had grown into a gnawing fear. The air in the apartment seemed heavier, as though the walls were pressing closer. Shadows pooled in the corners, darker and more opaque than they should have been in the midday light. When I glanced at the window, I swore I saw a flicker of movement, as if something darted just out of sight. And then, as evening fell, the whispers began. They were faint at first, indistinct murmurs that could easily be mistaken for the hum of distant traffic or the rustling of leaves. But as the hours ticked by, they grew louder, clearer. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. A soft, rhythmic chant that seemed to echo from every shadowed corner of the room. Desperate for answers, I pulled out my phone and searched for any mention of the silver birch. What I found only deepened my dread. The tree was steeped in folklore, described as a boundary between worlds. Legends spoke of figures who appeared beneath its branches, offering promises too enticing to resist. They called them shadow dancers, beings who drew the lonely and the lost into their world, binding them through rituals that entwined their souls. The stories were vague, fragmented, but one detail stood out. Those who danced with the shadows were never the same. They lived haunted by whispers, their own shadows acting as conduits to something far darker. None of the accounts explained how to break the bond, if it could even be broken. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. The whispers grew louder, almost taunting me. And my shadow. It moved again, this time without me, shifting slightly as if adjusting its position to face me. "Leave me alone," I whispered, my voice trembling. But the shadow didn't obey. It stretched unnaturally, the edges blurring and distorting until it no longer resembled my silhouette. I backed away, my breath quickening as it began to rise, pulling itself upright, standing before me like a dark, rippling figure. Why resist? The words weren't spoken aloud, but I heard them clearly in my mind, cold and unyielding. "You accepted the invitation. You belong to us now." I bolted from the living room, my heart pounding as I stumbled into the kitchen. My hand fumbled for the light switch, but even under the fluorescent glow, the shadow followed, its form flickering at the edges like a flame caught in the wind. I clutched the counter, trying to steady myself. "This isn't real," I muttered. "This can't be real." But it was real. I could feel its presence, the weight of its gaze pressing down on me. It loomed at the edge of the light, just out of reach, a shifting mass of darkness that pulsed with a life of its own. "You must complete the dance," the voice echoed in my mind, each word laced with a chilling certainty. "Only then will you understand. Only then will you find peace." "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Your place," it whispered. "Your light, your soul." I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the cold cabinets. The stories I had read spun through my mind, their warnings clear. The dance wasn't just a ritual, it was an exchange. The figure beneath the birch had marked me, chosen me to be its bridge between the worlds. "Why me?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. The shadow tilted its head, its form rippling like water disturbed. "Because you are like us, alone, adrift, forgotten by the world above." The words cut deep, and for a moment, I felt the weight of their truth. I had spent so many nights yearning for connection, for something to fill the void that stretched endlessly within me. The figure had offered exactly that, a companion, a place where I wouldn't have to feel the aching pull of loneliness. But at what cost? I forced myself to stand, the fear replaced by a flicker of resolve. "I won't let you take me," I said, though my voice wavered. The shadow seemed to smile, though it had no mouth. "You already belong to us. The only question is when you will accept it." The room dimmed as the lights flickered, the whispers rising into a haunting chorus. Shadows danced along the walls, closing in, their movements hypnotic. I clenched my fists, refusing to give in to the pull. As the world around me blurred, a single thought burned in my mind. I had to find a way to end the dance before it ended me. The whispers followed me into the night. They seeped into every corner of my apartment, growing louder with each passing second. Shadows writhed on the walls, coiling and stretching like living things, their forms distorted beyond reason. My breaths came in shallow gasps as I fled, clutching the crimson envelope as though it might offer some protection. The street outside was eerily silent. No cars passed, no voices echoed, just the sound of my footsteps against the pavement. The air was unnaturally still, carrying with it a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. My shadow followed me, rippling unnaturally in the glow of the streetlights, always just a step too slow. the silver birch. I didn't know why, but I was drawn back to it, as if the answers I sought lay beneath its ghostly branches. The invitation's pull was undeniable, an invisible thread tugging me through the darkness. I reached the edge of the forest, where the trees loomed like skeletal sentinels, their bare branches clawing at the starless sky. As I stepped into the woods, the world seemed to shift. The air grew colder, heavier, and the ground beneath my feet felt insubstantial, as though I were walking on the surface of a dream. The shadows around me deepened, swallowing the faint light of the moon. My own shadow moved ahead of me now, leading the way, its shape more defined and sinister with every step. When I reached the clearing, the silver birch stood waiting, its pale bark shimmering faintly in the oppressive gloom. Beneath its twisted branches, the figure awaited me, their form clearer than before. They were no longer just a shadow, but a being of rippling darkness, their edges shimmering like heat waves. The silver eyes that had haunted my dreams locked onto mine. "You've returned," they said, their voice soft yet heavy with meaning. "You're ready to complete the dance." "I didn't come to finish anything," I said, my voice trembling despite the defiance I tried to muster. "I came to end this." The figure tilted their head, the motion graceful and unnerving. "There is no end, only transformation. You've already felt it, the bond between us, the way your shadow no longer belongs to you. It is the bridge, and through it, you will join us." The shadows around the clearing began to move, coalescing into shapes. Figures emerged, flickering and indistinct, their forms twisted and incomplete. I recognized them, not their faces, but the emptiness in their eyes, the same void I had felt in my own life. They were the lost, the forgotten, those who had danced before me and never returned. The whispers surged, growing into a cacophony that pressed against my mind. The silver birch trembled, its branches twisting as if alive. I clutched the crimson envelope tighter, the wax seal now warm to the touch. In that moment, a realization struck me. The seal was the tether, the mark of the bond. If I could break it, maybe I could sever the connection. "You don't have to fight," the figure said, stepping closer. "You can be free, no longer alone, no longer adrift. Stay, and I will show you a world without pain, without longing." The temptation was almost unbearable. The weight of loneliness I had carried for so long felt suffocating, and their words offered a seductive reprieve. But as I stared into their silver eyes, I remembered the faces of those shadowy figures, their emptiness, their silence. They hadn't found freedom. They had become part of something far darker. I tore the envelope in half. The effect was immediate. The whispers faltered, their rhythm breaking into disjointed fragments. The figure recoiled, their form flickering as though struggling to hold itself together. The shadows writhed violently, retreating into the edges of the clearing. For the first time, the silver birch stood still, its branches no longer twisting. "You cannot escape," the figure hissed, their voice cracking with an edge of desperation. "The bond is eternal." But the envelope, now torn and discarded at my feet, seemed to sever their hold. My shadow began to shift, merging once again with my form. I felt lighter, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. I turned and ran, the path through the forest now clear and bathed in faint moonlight. The whispers faded behind me, replaced by the sound of my pounding footsteps. When I finally burst out of the woods, the oppressive air lifted, and the world felt real again. In the days that followed, the shadows in my apartment returned to normal. The whispers were gone, and my shadow moved as it should, bound to me once more. But the silver birch haunted my thoughts, its pale branches etched into my memory like scars. Even now, I can feel the faint pull of that otherworldly place, the shadowed realm that almost claimed me. And though the crimson envelope is gone, Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I think I hear the whispers again, soft, faint, and always just out of reach.